Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Michael and Friends. And today I'm very privileged and proud to welcome Peter Gelb, the CEO of the Metropolitan Opera, one of the most prominent art managers in the world today, at the helm of an organization which has an overall budget, I believe, of about 300 million. Certainly the biggest classical music institution in the world. And Peter, welcome. And where does the Met stand today?
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm very happy to be speaking with you. We do have an annual budget of slightly in excess of $300 million. I'm not particularly proud of that fact because it just makes it that much harder for us to make ends meet, since the challenges of running an arts organization the size of the Met, and as well as for smaller ones, is greater today than ever before. I think we can safely say. I mean, the global economic conditions, since of course the Met relies upon private donations, not government help, recovering from the pandemic, the loss of older audiences, perhaps permanently because of the pandemic and for other reasons, the need for opera in particular to reinvent itself programmatically in terms of developing new works that will attract new audiences. There are so many challenges and so many things that we have to do running a company like the Met, and that applies to other companies as well, to keep this art form alive and well into the future, and to keep the Met in particular, which is my primary concern, artistically and economically sustainable. So we have a lot to think about and worry about on a daily basis.
Yes, I mean, you have maneuvered, as I said, one of the biggest art institutions in the world through one of the most critical stages. And we know that Met has a usual attendance of 3,800 per night. And having to go through such a crisis, and the way you handled it is quite remarkable. And it seems unimaginable to European art managers that you can actually run an opera house only on the base of ticket sales and donations and sponsorship. And so this is a really incredible achievement. What did you do in terms of younger audiences? I think that your initiative with the contemporary opera, which again, to most people is something they rarely go to, but you and Yannick Nézet-Séguin have developed a new vision also for the Met that has become very successful. I think the recent premiere of The Champion was again a huge success, and you're attracting new audiences. What made this become so successful?
Thankfully, new audiences and younger audiences don't have the belief that new classical music and new operas are meant to be unpopular, and because they don't have the baggage that unfortunately goes along with many of the modern compositions of the last 40 or 50 years, which unfortunately, although they may have impeccable academic and intellectual standards, were not composed for the enjoyment or emotional release of audiences. And and I'm not saying this to be disrespectful to some of the great minds of classical music of recent decades who have created many genius works, but they were genius works for a very small segment of the public. And the larger classical music and opera public ran away from these works because they were so emotionally empty and were more really meant to stimulate the intellect. And for opera, which is a form, as you know, of musical theater, theater and music don't succeed with the public unless they touch your heart and soul as well as your mind. So It's really, I think that in a way, the entire world of classical music and opera was pushed into a corner by so many inaccessible new works that dominated the new musical scene of classical music and opera over the last 50 years. Thankfully, that is all changing now, particularly in the United States, where composers who are very talented are following in the footsteps of John Adams and Philip Glass, who were the mavericks who bucked that inaccessible trend in the last century and the recent years of this century. But young composers like the theatrical composer Janine Tesori, who's writing a new opera for us called Grounded, Matt O'Coin, certainly the jazz great Terence Blanchard, Kevin Putz. There's a whole group of composers who are writing music today that they actually, shockingly, I guess by the older standards, want to have audience success, and we are happily supporting them with productions of their works because they are achieving audience success, and they're doing something that was needed a long time ago, but is only happening today, which is actually appealing to new, younger, diverse audiences that we need desperately if opera is going to survive, at least in New York City.
Well, Peter, that's a very interesting discussion. We could go on for 3 hours because my background comes from Europe more, even though I studied at Juilliard and had a strong American influence in my life. But, when we were young and 20 or 30 years old, we were fighters for the revolution still. We thought, contemporary music could not be popular. And it's interesting, I myself go always through this process every day of thinking, now what is the real music? What is the real contemporary language? How should we project it? What's the message? And I see that, as you say, times are changing. And I see also, it's great to have those differences. It's great that Europe or Germany or Switzerland or England have different languages, and that the America has a different language. I was trained with American compositions like Roger Sessions and Peter Menin and Virgil Thompson that we learned at Juilliard, and of course also Elliott Carter or John Adams. And it's fascinating to listen to contemporary language, and I feel that it's also great to bring out the differences. But you've done a remarkable thing now with the contemporary series. And I think also in Yannick, you have a great interpreter that really stands for it and puts all his emotion in it. That seems to be a great constellation. But you also, last year, you were at the helm of a new, very, very important initiative, the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, that I believe you were a strong part of really pushing this project. And you brought art also into the conflict of a terrible war, a terrible aggression by Russia towards the Ukraine. And you have found these wonderful musicians. You have created this orchestra at one of the worst crises of the Ukrainian people. How did this come about?
I think these are such hard and horrible times for a civilization. The invasion of the Russians of Ukraine, which of course really began in 2014, and the whole world ignored that, including myself, I have to say. It was only really when Russia brutally upped the ante in 2022, when they just decided to stamp out and wipe out an entire civilization of Ukraine, that the world woke up. And I'm glad we woke up. It's better late than never, certainly. The Met is very proud of the leadership role we have taken amongst performing arts organizations in supporting Ukraine fight for its own cultural legacy. And there are many, we felt that we could serve a purpose in the cultural defense of Ukraine. And that's why really from the very first days of the invasion, we have taken action. We've taken action in numerous ways. We've held concerts in support of Ukraine, conducted by our great music director, Yannick Nézet-Séguin. We helped create together with the Polish Opera and the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture, the first iteration of the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, which I know is coming to Lucerne this summer. And I'm very proud of my wife, Carolyn Wilson, who is the founder and the conductor of it, and she herself is part Ukrainian. And the musicians who form this orchestra come from all over Ukraine. They are members of opera companies and orchestras from Kharkiv to Kiev to Lviv to Odessa, as well as some of the refugees who fled Ukraine and who are either temporarily living in Warsaw, in Poland, or who have taken up positions in amongst other European orchestras. But they believe in the artistic freedom and liberty of their country, and they are regarded as soldiers, really cultural soldiers fighting in defense of their country. And so the Met is very proud to have helped organize them, and not only last summer when they first performed, but this coming summer when they are reunited in August, once again coming together in Warsaw before they embark on their tour. We've also worked with the First Lady of Ukraine and the Ministry of Culture to bring Ukrainian interns to work at the Met. There are 4 Ukrainian interns at the Met right now as we speak, who are working in different departments, and we're helping them. We're also actively planning to commission, we're not ready to announce it today, but we're going to be commissioning an important Ukrainian composer to write an opera about the war that will hopefully be on the stage of the Met in a few years. We believe that there is no room in this world for moral ambiguity. I mean, if ever there was a case of right and wrong and good and bad, it's Russia and Ukraine. I mean, everything Russia has done is horrible. It's an offense to the world, and everybody who believes in democracy and freedom should be on the right side of this issue. There aren't so many issues which are so clearly cut or defined as this one. So it makes it very simple, I think, for everyone to support Ukraine, and those who don't, I can't understand why they don't. And I do not feel comfortable with the idea of Russian artists who are publicly in support of Putin performing in the West in opera companies, for opera companies or orchestras. At the same time, I also believe that the Russian artists who still are in Russia, I believe should not be penalized or punished simply because they're Russian. I mean, they should have the opportunity to continue to perform, provided they're not public supporters of Putin or the regime or the war.
Well, it's good to hear very clear words from you on this, and I totally agree. It's interesting to see, however, in those situations, how opinions can be maneuvered and manipulated. And obviously, I also feel, great pain when I see how Russia is going down, a country full of culture and wonderful artists that we have all enjoyed on our stages and that are locked into a conflict that they, to some extent, have nothing to do with. And Ukraine suffering in a way that is totally unimaginable. And this at the border to Western Europe and to Western civilization. So I'm very thankful for your initiative as well. It's also the reason why we bring it to Lucerne, because we feel very, very passionate also about this initiative.
Right.
And I think it's a great thing. And you always hear again and again, art should not be involved in those kind of conflict, and let's stay above it, and let's be neutral. I don't agree. I think it's good and necessary to make statements.
Well, I think it's an interesting point because, I was actually in Moscow the day before the invasion began, attending the final dress rehearsal of what was supposed to be a co-production of a new production of Lohengrin that was going to be performed and was performed at the Bolshoi and then was going to come to the Met. And I have always, all through the 80s, I've been around quite a while working in music. And I was a documentary filmmaker and a producer of special cultural events. And in the 80s, I worked very closely with the then Soviet Union. So I was always, involved in cultural exchange and cultural projects, in spite of all the political differences and the extreme tension. Because I, like you, I think, believe that art is a way of rising above and addressing differences between cultures and being a kind of a solve or a soothing, providing a soothing way of getting people to understand each other from very differing regimes. But the difference here was that, that was all during the Cold War, and this is a real war. And it's no different than trying to have a rational conversation with Adolf Hitler during World War II. I mean, Putin is a monster, and the only way this situation will ever be resolved is when he is out of power. And that's, it's and Russia has changed and withdrawn its occupying forces from Ukraine. At the same time, I totally agree with you that, I mean, Russian culture is such an important part of the cultural legacy of this world that it should never be denied. And Putin in his propaganda efforts in an attempt to make the world feel sorry for him, not that anybody does. Early on in the war was saying how the West was canceling Russian culture. The Met was not canceling Russian culture. I mean, we canceled a particular singer, and the very day that Putin a year ago, or slightly more than a year ago, was denouncing the West for canceling Russian culture, we were putting on a performance of Eugene Onegin with Russian singers in it. Which is why at the time I was being interviewed, I think, by The Guardian, and I said our goal was to cancel Putin, not Pushkin. Great Russian art must exist. And on the other hand, I do understand the Ukrainian position. I mean, where they're so shell-shocked and have been so devastated and by the horrible criminal acts of war against them, that I am sympathetic that in Ukraine, they don't want people speaking Russian anymore. They want them speaking Ukrainian, and they don't want to put on Russian art. That's understandable. But I do feel that for a company like the Met, and we should not be, it is not of any, it doesn't serve any purpose, any good purpose to cancel Russian art. Because, I mean, Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich were not responsible for Putin.
Absolutely. I mean, Tchaikovsky lived for some time in Kiev, and so many Russian artists of grandeur had to flee Russia. So it's a very, very difficult history that this country has. And one of the positive aspects is that Ukraine has risen far above Russia now, and really becoming a partner also of the West and democracy and the resistance that the Ukrainians show is truly remarkable with the few resources they have. in military terms, now improving, fortunately. But let us turn to a more optimistic, a more pleasant subject. Lucerne Festival is celebrating the theme of paradise. Now, this may seem, you know, wonderful and nice, but really, I mean, I don't know if you ever think about such a theme, as we're all involved in our work every day and numbers and whatnot. But what is paradise to you?
To be honest, you know, I don't really think about paradise too often. And it seems to
Why
be
not?
it seems to be increasingly unobtainable in any event, or more and more elusive. I guess, I mean, I think it's a noble idea for a festival, and I think it's certainly, you know, if we all, the world needs to be able to think, at least in some part, optimistically, about the future. It's hard, you know, I think, for me, to think beyond what the immediate troubles of the world, and there's so many that are going on. And I feel that, as personally, as long as I am attempting to fight in the kind of the cultural trenches, whether it's for Ukraine or just keeping the Metropolitan Opera going, it's hard to think of paradise, because I think for me, paradise is the ultimate release. I think it's too soon to be thinking in those terms. I'm too dedicated to my work and to the success that I need to achieve for the Met and for our art form. But I certainly like the idea of that people are thinking about paradise, and I applaud you for having that in your mind as you conceive this year's festival.
Yeah, well, I mean, geopolitically, things couldn't be worse at the moment, or they still could get worse. We all know, but paradise is also fleeing from reality. I mean, we were evicted from paradise as soon as we were created, because we just failed. And on the other hand, I remember being a young student at Juilliard. For me, paradise was going to the Met on Saturday evenings. And I was particularly loved the matinee performances, which for me were like really paradise. And I think we all can believe that paradise is closer than we think it is. It's maybe in biblical terms, in religious terms, it's put too high. But we will start with Paradise on August 11 in the summer in Lucerne with Ricardo Chailly and the Lucerne Festival Orchestra performing Mahler's legendary Third Symphony, describing the world and nature in really incredible terms. And we would love to invite you, Peter, and your wife, Carrie Lynn, to this performance, hoping to see you at the opening of Lucerne Festival. And you actually never told me if you were in Lucerne. I don't remember.
I have not been to the Lucerne Festival in many years, and I think when I mean, it really dates me, but I think the last time I was in Lucerne for a performance was when I was the assistant manager of the Boston Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah,
and it was probably
they're coming back this summer.
I think this was in 1978 or 79, so that was a while ago. And long before the amazing things that you did to the festival to make it so great and so important as you have, you know, certainly music has the ability. A great musical performance like the Mahler 3 that you described, I think, has the ability to make one feel temporarily transported to paradise. I certainly felt that the other day when I was listening to Gustavo Dudamel conduct the Mahler 9th. At the New York Philharmonic. I was at a performance a couple of days ago. And certainly I think I would feel that way, perhaps, I felt that way perhaps when hearing the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra and the passionate playing of these musicians who are trying to transform their country, if not into a paradise, but at least into a safe haven for themselves once again. And I know that the program that they've chosen for Lucerne, which includes the Beethoven Eroica Symphony, will be a very powerful and moving experience for everyone, for the musicians on the stage as well as the audience.
Peter, thank you for your very precious time, for being with us, and Michael and friends, and so much looking forward to be welcoming you personally at Lucerne Festival 2023. And good luck with the remainder of your season and preparing next season and all the budgets and numbers and wonderful performances that you are creating on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be talking with you, and I wish you all the best for this summer's festival. And I'm so happy that the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra is part of it.
Thank you very much.